finally awake.
I'll say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
All you're focusing on right now is gun control. What about the violence in our video games?
What about the impact of violence in the entertainment culture?
A callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow industry. Vicious, violent video games.
When they go over the edge, they transpose themselves. They become part of one of those video games. And perhaps that's why all these assault weapons are used.
Interaction between violence, the realism that you find in games and movies.
Film, television, music, dress, technology, games, they've become one giant playground filled with accessible evil, darker than ever before.
Now video games like Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, and Doom make our children more active participants in simulated violence.
They're able to hook into the internet and play video games that are extraordinarily violent, cause the blood pressure to rise and the adrenaline to flow as they play those games and see people killed or be killed.
Isn't making a game and selling it that encourages a kid to point a gun at a television set encouraging criminality? I mean, we're all aware of this incredible outbreak of gun violence in our country.
Objection!
The brief montage that was just shown were elected officials expressing their views that video games are responsible for the perceived increase in violence in this country, especially with regards to mass shootings. This is a sentiment that has been expressed many times by many powerful people in this country for decades now, regardless of party affiliation. However, our presentation is a complete rebuttal to this argument. Based on easily obtainable data, it is clear that video games do not cause violence, and when looking at data from other countries outside the United States, there even seem to be indications that they can reduce violence. To begin the presentation, we'll be looking at the kinds of age demographics that consume these kinds of products.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Alright, so to start us off, we're going to be taking a look at the age demographic of video game players. So there's a commonly held belief that video games are mostly played by minors. However, it's only about a quarter of the total population of video game players that are minors. It's about 28% to be exact. And so to go off of the minors that are playing video games, we're going to next be talking about the juvenile arrests and video game sales in the U.S.
Alright, chums up. Ready, guys? Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
A trend that has remained consistent is that video games have been continuously increasing in popularity. Based on the argument that video games cause more violence and have been causing more violence for years, logically speaking, there should be a consistent increase in violence to go along with that increase in popularity. However, that has not been the case. First, we wanted to focus on the younger demographic. While they are a smaller portion of people that play video games, they tend to spend the most time playing them, and they are also a cause of the majority of the concern being expressed with regards to this topic. This graph shows a steady increase in U.S. video game sales. Aside from the brief dip in recession, they have been continuously going up. Yet, the amount of total juvenile arrests have steadily dropped to an almost shocking amount. Video games have never been more popular, yet according to this data, the under 18 demographic has never been less prone to criminal activity. But what about everyone else? This chart takes data from the FBI and shows how rates of all kinds of violent and non-violent crime have changed since the turn of the century. While the decrease is not as stark here as the under 18 demographic, without exception, all rates of crime across all categories are lower than what they were before the turn of the century. It is hard to imagine how this could be a given how much more popular gaming has become. One possible rebuttal is that maybe video games are still making people more violent, but there are other forces that are pushing the level of crime down to the point that there is still a decrease despite this. The evidence provided here is not 100% able to disprove this argument. However, the rest of our data can.
Mass shootings and gun-related deaths always leave everyone with the question, why? What was the motive of someone like Stephen Paddock, 64-year-old, who was responsible for the deadliest mass shooting in history, or Adam Lanza, who killed 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary? Some blame mental illness, some blame ease of access to guns, and others blame violent video games. Those that blame video games include politicians such as Donald Trump and Chris Christie. Keep in mind that there are over 2.5 billion video game players worldwide. With that logic in mind, let's take a look at some other countries that are high up there with the US in video game consumption. As you can see, the United States, Japan, United Kingdom, and Korea are the top 4 spenders in the video game industry. So if those politicians from before were right, all 4 of these high video game spending countries should also have violence and gun-related problems like the United States. Wrong. In fact, all 3 of these countries are substantially lower in gun-related deaths rates than the United States. In order to get a better picture, we will now talk about the correlation between video games and homicide deaths.
Remember, no Russian.
While the 2 graphs above gave us an opposite to what most people think about video games and gun-related deaths, we want to make the argument more convincing by gathering further data from other countries. We were able to gather data of 20 countries, which, apart from those mentioned above, are China, Germany, France, Spain, Canada, Italy, Russia, Brazil, Australia, Mexico, Taiwan, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Netherlands, and Thailand, and combine it with the homicide deaths in a scatterplot. We chose the revenue of 2016 and combined it with the sum of homicides in 2 years, because we believe it takes time for video games to negatively impact the behavior of the players, and 2 years is a reasonable period. If there is a relationship between video games and deaths, the scatterplot will show a clear pattern like a line or a curve. However, as can be seen, there is no certain trend or pattern. The dots are just clutterly distributed. Therefore, the data suggests that video games are not related to the homicide deaths as it was believed. Next, we will take a look at the relationship between video games and education.
Meeny, miny, mo. If my mama had waterboarded me more often, I wouldn't be the gun-toting psychopath you see before you now.
Our final argument that people have against video games is that they are distracting and have no benefits. As a rebuttal, we created a graduation chart to help show that video games are not harmful and do not distract kids from school, and may even be the reason that we see a steady increase in the graduation rates.
You! No talk. Play!
What's the plan? I'm thinking.
No talk!
One chance, Mason. We'll take it. Okay.
You can't kill me!
In conclusion, video games are not a cause of violent behavior, and parents, government officials, and opposers, if anything, should consider them a healthy, positive activity. Much of the concern in America stems from a fear of perceptions and an increase in violent crime, especially related to large mass shootings. People need something to blame these problems on, and video games are an easy target. However, the perception of increasing overall violence in America is misguided, and additionally, when compared to other countries that consume large amounts of the same kinds of video games, this argument does not hold up. Are there problems with violence, especially gun violence, in America? Data indicates there is. However, video games are not the cause of these problems. Just look at that happy family right there.
Are on site and attempting to disarm. I repeat,